Welcome to the third and last in our series, 10 Crucial Convictions. It really matters what you believe. I've heard people say, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're really sincere. Now, it's strange how we'll apply that to spiritual things, but we would never dream of applying it to the physical world. I've never heard of anyone standing on the edge of a cliff and saying, I sincerely believe I can fly, and then jump off. If they did, the death would be put down to insanity. And yet, in matters of eternal life and death, we're willing to say it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere. It matters very much. The book of Job is about belief systems, and it gives us 10 beliefs that it's really important that we hold. Each of us inside our head has got a set of beliefs. I like to call them maps. Here's a little girl looking at the world. And as she's growing up, she's forming a picture in her mind of what the world is about. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see that she's got her picture back to front. Now, our picture of the world is never fully accurate because the world is far too complex. Other people are far too complex. But we live on these maps, and they're approximations. As we grow up, we need to keep reviewing our maps. In fact, that's a very good definition of maturity, is someone who's willing to keep renewing their maps as they grow older and never stop, because our maps are never 100%. And every now and again, you discover that your map is not matching reality, and it gives you an uncomfortable feeling. The technical term for that is cognitive dissonance. There's a dissonance and unhappiness between what I'm thinking and what I'm seeing. And every time I feel that, it's an opportunity to grow. I was once in southern Johannesburg, and I know the area well, but at night, and I got lost. And I said to my wife, well, let me find the Hillbrow Tower. And I looked out my window, and it wasn't there where I thought it should be. And then I looked out her window, and there it was. My map had got 180 degrees back to front. Very uncomfortable feeling, cognitive dissonance. And it was very difficult to turn it back. Now, there are people, it's one definition of immaturity, who rather than do the hard work of changing the map, will try to force the world to fit their map. And those people can be quite dangerous. And so we've had so far 7 crucial convictions. Let me remind you of what they are. Number 1, we are not in a cause and effect relationship with God. Number 2, Satan and the spirit world are real and are opposed to God and his people. Number 3, there are things going on in heavenly places of which we are totally unaware. Number 4, bad things happen to good people. Number 5, fears can be self-fulfilling. Number 6, grief and perplexity are part of life and need to be expressed. Number 7, people with faith can withstand tremendous trials. And so we come to the last chapters of the book. First, we will deal with a man called Elihu. He's the 4th of Job's so-called friends. None of them are real friends. None of them help him at all. They make his life much worse. But Elihu is the youngest of the 4. And he talks for longer, would you believe, in the book than God does. We always need to be very careful if we're talking more than God. And he does. And it's wonderful stuff. It's stuff I could use in a sermon. I could use it in my prayer time. Look at this wonderful passage from Job chapter 37. God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding. Out of the north he comes in golden splendor. God comes in awesome majesty. The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. Therefore people revere him, for does he not have regard for all the wise in heart? How great is God beyond our understanding. That's wonderful stuff. And yet God is tremendously angry with Elihu. Why? What's wrong with that stuff? Well, the answer is threefold. Firstly, he does not believe the last sentence of what he's just said. He does not believe that God is beyond our understanding. Elihu's map is, I can understand God. And he works from that point of view. And it's a wrong map, because we cannot understand God. The second thing wrong with Elihu Have a look at Job chapter 33. Now, Job, listen to my words. Pay attention to everything I say. I'm about to open my mouth. My words are on the tip of my tongue. My words come from an upright heart. My lips sincerely speak what I know. The Spirit of God has made me. The breath of Almighty gives me life. Answer me then if you can. Stand up and argue your case before me. I am the same as you in God's sight. I too am a piece of clay. Now watch the screen carefully and look how many he uses words like me, my, I. Elihu is very self-centered. All the God talk, but he's never dealt with the issue of self. And that is his second problem. His third problem, have a look at the passage in chapter 32. Elihu became very angry with Job for justifying himself. He was also angry with the three friends because they'd found no way to refute Job. But when he saw that the three men had nothing more to say, his anger was aroused. Notice anger. He's an angry young man. Why is he so angry? Nothing's happened to him. He hasn't lost his health. He hasn't lost his money. He hasn't lost his children. Why is he so angry? The answer is he hates having his maps questioned. He has a map. His map is that God rewards the good and God punishes the bad. Therefore, Job must be being punished with all this having gone wrong with him. And when he cannot make the world fit into that map, he gets very angry. And he does great damage to Job and to those around him. And so Elihu speaks for 6 chapters. And we reach the end of chapter 37, and God has not said a word. God has been silent for 37 chapters. And what I find interesting is that in all that time, nobody asks, why is God so silent? They're all so busy speaking that they don't even notice that God is silent. We need to be very careful that we don't talk more than God does. And we need to be careful to ask, why is God silent right now? And so God is silent for a long time. And then in chapter 38, God starts to speak. In verse 1 we read, the Lord answered Job out of the storm. Why out of the storm? Because God is angry. God is angry, particularly with his 4 friends, especially with Elihu. God is angry. We need to have a part in our faith which is intimidating. There needs to be a healthy fear of God. I remember an interview held with one of the space shuttle pilots, the first space shuttle to fly after the Columbia blew up. And someone said to him, are you afraid? And he gave a wonderful answer. He said, if you're not afraid, you don't understand the forces at play. Of course we must be afraid of God. In that lovely book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the children are approaching Aslan the lion. That's been their quest. And they're coming near now. And the little boy says to the big boy, is he safe? And the big boy gives that wonderful answer, of course he's not safe, but he's good. And so there needs to be a part in us that understands God can speak out of the storm. And there's a part of us that needs to be afraid of him. So why is God so angry? God is angry when human beings presume to be able to understand him. And he asks 70 questions, 70 being the perfect number. And the aim of these questions is quite simply, in the words of the old song, for us to learn how small we are, how little we know. We have a wonderful word in Zulu. It's the word ngas. It means I don't know. But it's got a kind of stronger meaning in Zulu than in English. I really don't know. I throw my hands up. God asks 70 questions, and the answer to all of them is, I can't answer, I don't know. And that's the intention. God is trying to show us how little we know. Let me pick one example. In Job chapter 39, verse 26, God says, does the osprey take flight by your wisdom? I managed to find a wonderful little clip, I don't know how they photograph these things, of an osprey fishing. And while he's fishing, I'll add a few questions of my own. Who teaches a bird to fly like that in the first place? Who taught the osprey how to catch 5 fish in his talons at one strike? Who taught the osprey how to deal with parallax error and the problem of refraction when hunting a fish underwater? Who taught the osprey how to get out of the water when his wings are completely wet while carrying something his own weight? Who taught the osprey that he can get out of the water carrying a fish heavier than himself? Who taught him how to carry it in one claw? Who taught him how to ride it like a skateboard? And God's question is, was it by your intelligence that all that was done? And the answer is certainly not. How little we know. And so that brings us to conviction number 8. The mind of God is beyond our understanding. The mind of God is beyond our understanding. As Calvin put it, the only way we know God is because he chooses to reveal himself to us. He accommodates himself to us. He talks baby talk using anthropomorphisms and metaphor. God has to use metaphor because the reality of God is far too great for my mind map to take in. And so my picture of God is always just approximations, and actually always only by what he's revealed to me. And the questions go on, and then in chapter 40, verse 2, we come to what I regard as the key question actually of the whole book. And it reads like this: will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. Crucial conviction number 9. God is sovereign. A wonderful Welsh pastor by the name of Derek Thomas said, God has no intention of submitting himself to the bar of his creatures and elevating them to be judges of his conduct. He does not recognize their right to be censors of him and his ways. John Calvin put it this way: God has such sovereignty over his creatures that he may dispose of them at his pleasure. Now that sentence won't go down too well at the office on Monday morning. God can dispose of us at his pleasure, but it's the truth. God created us. He can dispose with us at his pleasure. And so corollary number 1 is God is never obliged to tell us what he's doing. God is never obliged to tell us what he's doing. He can if he wishes, but he doesn't have to. Now, there was a survey held in England some time ago, and it was a survey about why don't you go to church? Why don't you follow God? And the answer that came back as number 1 was, why do innocent people suffer? The problem of suffering. It's a very serious problem to people, and it's the number 1 problem. Now, if ever there was a book that should have answered that question, it was the book of Job, the book about suffering. Now, of course, all great politicians have publicity managers. They watch them and they say, I think you'd better do this, or I think you'd better do that. For example, when Kennedy was running for president, they realized that his Catholic faith was a problem. And so his publicity manager said, we think you must give a speech to talk about your religion. And Kennedy did that, and many think that was the turning point that led him to become president. Now, excuse the arrogance of this, but imagine I were God's publicity manager. And I read that survey in England, and I saw that many people are not following God because they don't understand the issue of suffering. I would have gone to God and I'd have said, God, I think you need to give an answer to this problem. People want to know why the innocent suffer. And if ever there was a book for God, an opportunity for God to do it, it was the book of Job. And yet God doesn't do it. So corollary number 2, God never gives an answer to the problem of suffering. And even if he did, it would be incomprehensible to the human mind. God never gives an answer to the problem of suffering. Instead, he just asks these unanswerable questions. And so God is sovereign. But now we come to the end, and we end with something, of course, wonderful. Coming out of these last chapters and these 70 questions, and it's crucial conviction number 10, God is always good. God is always good. There are times when he might require his children to go to a place where they feel that God has forsaken them. In his sovereignty, he might require that. But whatever it feels like, God is always good and always working for the good of us, his creatures. It's a wonderful truth. God is always good. How do I know that from these chapters? Because God created a perfect world. It is a most amazing planet, absolutely perfect. Job chapter 38 verse 4 says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation, while the morning stars sang together?" Where were you? Well, the truth is, if we understand the scientists correctly, the Big Bang was something of an enormity way beyond our understanding, and it's just as well we weren't there. But God was there, and he never burnt his fingers. Where were you when the morning stars sang together? We now know from the Hubble telescope and other amazing instruments that the stars do sing. We believe the singing is actually the echo of the Big Bang. But there it is, the morning stars sing together. And God created this incredible fiery universe. And as it settled down, he was able to create this perfect planet that we can live on. There's a wonderful book by Bill Bryson called Short History of Almost Everything. In it, he depicts the very small balances by which we live. They estimate if the world were 5% further from the sun or 5% closer to the sun, life would have been impossible. If our moon were 5% further away or 5% closer or 5% heavier, we would have wobbled and we'd have gone through ice ages and burnt up every year. Would have been impossible to live. Of course it was designed. This wonderful, perfect world in which we live. And so we come to the end of these 10 crucial convictions. It's so important that they get from my head to my heart. And there they are, these 10 crucial convictions. If I believe them, I will be founded like on the rock of Gibraltar. If I don't believe them, my life is going to go awry. Wonderful values that God has given us, wonderful beliefs, and you can build your life on them.